Technical Sergeant Rachel Adams stood in the middle of the Fort Gordon Communications Training Facility, her hands trembling as she tried to remember the basic steps of setting up a field radio. The ANPRC 77 radio lay before her, its complex array of dials and switches seeming to mock her every move. Around her, other trainees moved with confidence, their hands steady and their movements precise. "Technical Sergeant Adams," called out Master Sergeant Johnson, his voice carrying across the training room. "What's taking so long? This is basic radio operations." Rachel's face flushed with embarrassment as she fumbled with the frequency settings. Her mind was blank, her training seemingly evaporated. The other trainees were watching now, some with concern, others with barely concealed amusement. This was supposed to be her element, her specialty, but she was failing spectacularly. "Sergeant, I'm having trouble with the frequency coordination," Rachel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Master Sergeant Johnson walked over, his expression a mix of frustration and disappointment. "Technical Sergeant, you've been here for 3 weeks and you're still making rookie mistakes. How do you expect to maintain communications in the field if you can't handle basic radio procedures? Which city are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else from your city is here too. And remember, if you believe heroes appear in the most unexpected ways, hit subscribe and give this video a like." The truth was, Rachel Adams was not who she appeared to be. Her service record showed a basic communications background, a few years of garrison duty, and a transfer to Fort Gordon for advanced communications training. But that record was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to hide a past that the Air Force had decided was too politically sensitive to acknowledge. Rachel Adams was actually one of the most decorated signals intelligence operatives in recent military history. She had served in classified operations across multiple theaters, leading intelligence-gathering missions that had intercepted critical enemy communications. She had broken over 100 enemy communication networks, earning a Signals Intelligence Badge, a Meritorious Service Medal, and numerous classified commendations. But her most significant achievement, the one that had forced her into hiding, was being the first female signals intelligence officer to successfully infiltrate and decrypt a major enemy command and control network. The operation had taken place during her second deployment to Afghanistan. Her team had been tasked with intercepting communications from a high-value Taliban command network that was coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The mission was supposed to be impossible. The enemy had implemented sophisticated encryption protocols, and the area was under constant surveillance. Rachel had volunteered to lead the signals intelligence mission herself. She had spent weeks studying the enemy's communication patterns, analyzing their encryption methods, and developing countermeasures to break their security. When the time came, she had led her team into enemy territory, establishing listening posts and intercepting communications that had been thought to be unbreakable. The mission had been a complete success, but it had also exposed a problem that the Air Force wasn't ready to face. Rachel Adams had proven that women could perform at the highest levels of signals intelligence, even in the most dangerous situations. But instead of being celebrated for her achievements, she had been quietly reassigned and her record had been sanitized. The official explanation was that her presence in combat zones had been a mistake, a bureaucratic error that had allowed a woman to serve in a role that was technically forbidden to her gender. The truth was more complicated. Rachel Adams had been too successful, too visible, and her continued presence in signals intelligence operations had threatened the delicate political balance that kept women out of direct combat roles. So she had been sent to Fort Gordon, given a new identity, and told to keep her mouth shut. She was supposed to be just another trainee, learning skills that she had already mastered years ago. But the training was designed for people who had never worked with military communications equipment, and Rachel found herself struggling to remember the artificial procedures that had been drilled into her during basic training. The real Rachel Adams would have known exactly what to do with that radio. She would have set the frequency, established communications, and moved on to the next task without hesitation. But the Rachel Adams who was supposed to be here, the one with the sanitized record, was supposed to be learning these skills for the first time. "Technical Sergeant Adams," Master Sergeant Johnson said again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I need you to demonstrate proper frequency setting technique, right now." Rachel took a deep breath and tried to focus. She had to remember what she was supposed to know, not what she actually knew. She had to be the person her record said she was, not the person she really was. "Sergeant, I understand the theory, Rachel said, trying to sound confident, but I'm having trouble with the practical application. Master Sergeant Johnson's expression softened slightly. I understand this can be overwhelming, technical sergeant, but you need to push through it. In the field, you won't have time to think. You'll need to act on instinct. If only you knew, Rachel thought. Her instincts were honed by years of real signals intelligence operations, but she couldn't use them here. She had to pretend to be learning skills that were second nature to her. The training continued throughout the day, with Rachel struggling through each exercise. She was supposed to be learning how to set up field radios, how to coordinate frequencies, how to troubleshoot communication problems. But every time she tried to perform these tasks, her real training took over, and she had to force herself to make the mistakes that a rookie would make. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Rachel was constantly fighting against her own instincts, trying to remember to do things the wrong way. She had to remind herself to hesitate, to second-guess herself, to ask for help when she knew exactly what to do. By the end of the day, Rachel was physically and emotionally drained. She had spent hours pretending to be incompetent at tasks that she had mastered years ago. She had watched other trainees struggle with procedures that she could perform in her sleep, and she had been unable to help them. As she walked back to her barracks that evening, Rachel couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep this up. How long could she pretend to be someone she wasn't? How long could she watch people struggle with problems that she could solve in seconds? The answer came the next morning, during a complex communications exercise. The scenario involved establishing a multi-node communication network across a large training area, with multiple frequencies and encryption protocols that had to be coordinated. Rachel was assigned to lead a team of 3 other trainees, and she was supposed to struggle with the basic procedures. But as she approached the first communication node, something in her snapped. She couldn't watch her team struggle with communications when she knew exactly how to coordinate them. Her training took over, and she began establishing the network with the skill and confidence of a seasoned signals intelligence officer. Technical Sergeant Adams, Master Sergeant Johnson called out, his voice sharp with surprise. "What are you doing?" Rachel looked up, realizing that she had slipped into her real persona. She had been establishing the communication network with the precision and speed of someone who had done this hundreds of times in real operations. She had been moving with the confidence of someone who had broken enemy communication networks. "I'm setting up the network, Sergeant," Rachel said, trying to sound uncertain. Master Sergeant Johnson walked over, his eyes narrowing as he watched Rachel work. "You're moving too fast, Technical Sergeant. You're supposed to be learning these procedures, not performing them like a veteran." Rachel forced herself to slow down, to make the mistakes that were expected of her. But it was too late. Master Sergeant Johnson had seen something in her movements, something that didn't match her supposed experience level. The next day, Rachel was called into Master Sergeant Johnson's office. The older man was sitting behind his desk, a file open in front of him. Rachel could see that it was her service record, but she knew it was the sanitized version. "Technical Sergeant Adams," Master Sergeant Johnson said, his voice serious. "I've been reviewing your file, and I have some concerns." Rachel's heart began to race. Had she been discovered? Had someone recognized her from her previous assignments? "Sergeant, your movements yesterday, during the communications exercise," Master Sergeant Johnson continued. "They were too precise, too confident. You moved like someone who had done this before, many times." Rachel tried to keep her expression neutral. "Sergeant, I've been studying the procedures very carefully. I want to be the best communications operator I can be." Master Sergeant Johnson nodded slowly. "I understand that, Technical Sergeant, but there's something else. Yesterday, when you were setting up that network, you used techniques that aren't taught in basic training. They're advanced procedures, ones that are only taught to experienced signals intelligence officers." Rachel felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had used techniques that she had learned during her second deployment to Afghanistan, techniques that had allowed her to break the Taliban's encrypted communications. She had used them without thinking, her training taking over completely. "Sergeant, I don't know what you're talking about," Rachel said, trying to sound confused. "I was just following the procedures I learned in class." Master Sergeant Johnson leaned back in his chair, studying Rachel carefully. "Technical Sergeant Adams, I've been training communications personnel for 20 years. I know what a rookie looks like, and you don't look like a rookie. You move like someone who has been in combat, who has broken enemy communications, who has made life-and-death decisions in real time." Rachel's mind was racing. She had to think of something, some explanation that would satisfy Master Sergeant Johnson without revealing her true identity. Sergeant, I have a photographic memory. I can remember procedures after seeing them once. Maybe that's why I seem more confident than I should be. Master Sergeant Johnson's expression didn't change. A photographic memory might explain your knowledge of procedures. Technical Sergeant, but it doesn't explain your confidence under pressure, your ability to make split-second decisions, or your instinctive understanding of signals intelligence. Rachel was running out of options. Master Sergeant Johnson was too experienced, too observant. She was going to figure out the truth sooner or later. The question was, what would happen when she did? Technical Sergeant Adams, Master Sergeant Johnson said, his voice becoming more serious. I want you to know that whatever you're hiding, whatever the reason for this deception, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to train you, to make sure you're ready for whatever the Air Force asks of you. Rachel looked up, meeting Master Sergeant Johnson's eyes for the first time. The older man's expression was one of understanding, not accusation. He wasn't trying to expose Rachel, he was trying to help her. Sergeant, I can't tell you everything, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can tell you that I'm not who my record says I am. Master Sergeant Johnson nodded slowly. I suspected as much, Technical Sergeant. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What happened next would change everything. Master Sergeant Johnson would discover Rachel's true identity, and the Air Force would be forced to confront the reality that they had been hiding one of their most capable signals intelligence officers. Rachel Adams would finally be recognized for her achievements, and the Air Force would begin the long process of integrating women into signals intelligence operations. But that was still in the future. For now, Rachel Adams was just another struggling trainee, trying to learn skills that she had already mastered, trying to be someone she wasn't. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same again. The following week brought even more challenges for Rachel. The training exercises became more complex, involving multiple communication systems, different types of encryption, and scenarios that tested not just communications knowledge, but also leadership and decision-making skills. Rachel found herself constantly walking a tightrope between showing enough competence to pass the course and revealing too much of her real experience. During a particularly challenging exercise involving a simulated cyber attack on military communications networks, Rachel was assigned to lead a team of 3 other trainees. The scenario required them to identify the source of the attack, implement countermeasures, and restore secure communications. It was exactly the kind of operation Rachel had led dozens of times in real signals intelligence operations, but she had to pretend to be learning it for the first time. Technical Sergeant Adams, you're in charge of this team, Master Sergeant Johnson announced. You have 30 minutes to identify the threat and restore communications. Go! Rachel immediately fell into her old role, analyzing the attack patterns with the expertise of someone who had spent years breaking enemy communications. She led her team with precision, identifying the source of the attack and implementing countermeasures with the efficiency of a veteran signals intelligence officer. She was working with the skill of someone who had done this before, and she could see Master Sergeant Johnson watching her with increasing interest. Time's up, Master Sergeant Johnson called out. Technical Sergeant Adams, report your findings. Rachel stood at attention and began her report. Sergeant, we successfully identified the attack as originating from a compromised server in the logistics network. We implemented firewall rules to isolate the threat, restored secure communications to all affected nodes, and established monitoring to prevent future attacks. The network is now secure and fully operational. The other trainees looked at her with amazement. She had used terminology and procedures that they hadn't learned yet, and she had organized the operation with a level of professionalism that seemed impossible for someone with her supposed experience. Master Sergeant Johnson's expression was unreadable. Technical Sergeant Adams, where did you learn to analyze cyber threats like that? Rachel felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had slipped up again, revealing knowledge that she wasn't supposed to have. Sergeant, I read about it in the training manual. I've been studying very hard. Really? Master Sergeant Johnson said, his voice skeptical. Because that manual doesn't cover half of what you just demonstrated. You moved like someone who has done this before. Technical Sergeant, multiple times. The other trainees were watching the exchange with growing interest. They had all noticed that Rachel seemed to know things that weren't taught in class, and they were beginning to wonder about her background. "Sergeant, I can explain," Rachel began, but Master Sergeant Johnson held up his hand. "Not here, Technical Sergeant. My office, now." As Rachel followed Master Sergeant Johnson to his office, she could feel the eyes of her fellow trainees on her back. They knew something was up, and they were going to want answers. But Rachel had bigger problems to worry about. Master Sergeant Johnson closed the door behind them and sat down at his desk. "Technical Sergeant Adams, I've been patient with you. I've given you the benefit of the doubt, hoping that you would come clean on your own. But this has gone on long enough." Rachel stood at attention, her heart racing. "Sergeant, I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games with me, Technical Sergeant," Master Sergeant Johnson said, his voice sharp. "I've been training communications personnel for 20 years. I know what a rookie looks like, and you are not a rookie. You move like someone who has been in combat, who has broken enemy communications, who has made life-and-death decisions in real time." Rachel felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Master Sergeant Johnson was too experienced, too observant. He had seen through the deception from the beginning, and he was not going to let it continue. "Sergeant, I can explain," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then explain," Master Sergeant Johnson said, "because right now you're looking at a possible Article 15 for falsifying official documents, and that's if you're lucky. If this goes higher up the chain of command, you could be looking at a court-martial." Rachel felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had known that this was a possibility, but she had hoped that it wouldn't come to this. She had hoped that she could complete her training and return to active duty without anyone discovering the truth. "Sergeant, I'm not who my record says I am," Rachel admitted, "but I can't tell you everything, not here, not now." Master Sergeant Johnson leaned back in his chair, studying Rachel carefully. "Technical Sergeant Adams, I want you to understand something. I'm not here to destroy your career. I'm here to train you, to make sure you're ready for whatever the Air Force asks of you. But I can't do that if I don't know who you really are." Rachel looked up, meeting Master Sergeant Johnson's eyes. The older man's expression was one of concern, not anger. He wasn't trying to expose Rachel, he was trying to help her. "Sergeant, I have a classified service record," Rachel said, choosing her words carefully. "I can't discuss the details, but I can tell you that I'm not a rookie. I have combat experience, and I have the training and skills to prove it." Master Sergeant Johnson nodded slowly. "I suspected as much, Technical Sergeant. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" What happened next would change everything. Master Sergeant Johnson would help Rachel navigate the bureaucratic maze that had hidden her true identity, and together they would force the Air Force to confront the reality that they had been hiding one of their most capable signals intelligence officers. Rachel Adams would finally be recognized for her achievements, and the Air Force would begin the long process of integrating women into signals intelligence operations. But that was still in the future. For now, Rachel Adams was standing in Master Sergeant Johnson's office, her carefully constructed world beginning to unravel around her. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and bureaucratic red tape. Master Sergeant Johnson had taken Rachel's case to his superiors, and the Air Force's internal investigation machine had begun to turn. Rachel found herself sitting in conference rooms with officers whose rank and authority far exceeded her own, explaining over and over again why she had been forced to hide her true identity. The investigation revealed the full extent of the deception. Rachel Adams' real service record showed multiple classified signals, intelligence operations, leadership of teams that had broken enemy communication networks, and decorations that included a signals intelligence badge, a meritorious service medal, and numerous other classified commendations. But more importantly, it showed that she had been one of the most effective signals intelligence officers in the entire theater of operations. The Air Force's response was swift and decisive. Rachel Adams was immediately promoted to Senior Master Sergeant and reassigned to a position that matched her actual experience and capabilities. She was given command of an advanced signals intelligence training team, where she could use her real knowledge to train the next generation of signals intelligence officers. But the real impact of Rachel Adams' story went far beyond her personal career. Her case had exposed a fundamental flaw in the Air Force's policy regarding women in signals intelligence operations. The Air Force had been hiding some of its most capable airmen simply because of their gender, and Rachel Adams's story had forced them to confront that reality. Within months of her case being resolved, the Air Force began the process of officially integrating women into signals intelligence operations. The policy change was announced with great fanfare, and Rachel Adams was invited to the Pentagon to witness the signing of the new regulations. As she stood in the Pentagon that day, watching the Secretary of Defense sign the documents that would change the Air Force forever, Rachel Adams couldn't help but think about all the other women who had been forced to hide their achievements, all the other airmen whose contributions had gone unrecognized because of outdated policies and political considerations. Her story had been about more than just one airman's struggle for recognition. It had been about the fundamental right of every airman to be judged by their abilities and achievements, not by their gender. It had been about the Air Force's responsibility to recognize and utilize the talents of all its airmen, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Rachel Adams' journey from struggling trainee to recognized signals intelligence veteran had been long and difficult, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the truth had to be forced into the light, even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. Sometimes the system had to be challenged, even when it seemed too powerful to change. The Air Force was better for having been forced to confront the reality of Rachel Adams's service, and Rachel Adams was better for having been forced to fight for the recognition she deserved. The truth had set her free, and in doing so, it had set the Air Force free as well. As Rachel Adams walked out of the Pentagon that day, she knew that her story was far from over. There would be other women following in her footsteps, other airmen whose achievements would finally be recognized. The Air Force was changing, and Rachel Adams had been one of the catalysts for that change. But for now, she was content to return to her new assignment, to use her hard-won knowledge and experience to train the next generation of signals intelligence officers. She had proven that women could serve at the highest levels of signals intelligence, and now she had the opportunity to ensure that other women would never have to hide their achievements again. The truth had been worth fighting for, and Rachel Adams had won her fight. The Air Force had been forced to acknowledge her service, and in doing so, it had been forced to acknowledge the service of all women who had been willing to put their lives on the line for their country. Rachel Adams' story was a testament to the power of perseverance, to the importance of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was a story that would inspire other women to follow in her footsteps, to demand the recognition they deserved for their service and sacrifice. The Air Force would never be the same again, and that was exactly as it should be.